Hello everybody and welcome to today's video. So today I want to talk about three stocks that I'm interested in, two of which that I own that are located in Brazil, operating in Latin America in general. And these stocks are StoneCo, Nubank, and MELI, MercadoLibre. And what I find interesting about this stock is how undervalued, in my opinion, they are. If you look at the price they're trading for, StoneCo is insanely undervalued at 2 times enterprise value over trailing 12-month gross profit, 1.5 for Ford, and then Nubank and MercadoLibre are also pretty undervalued if you take into account their gross margin and their growth rate, respectively, knowing that all of these companies grow at least at 50%-ish revenue each year. So these are companies that can really grow a lot, and I think they're largely undervalued compared to their US counterparts. And feel free to pause the video if you want to look at how I valued some US companies right here with the same framework. You can see a lot of red. A lot of these companies are much more valued than these three Brazilian companies. So, and if you go on, like even if I use a favored Wall Street metric, which is not my favorite, but that's price to sales. Even if I use price to sales, which is widely used to look at growth stocks, and I try to find the US comparison, and I meant Square for Stone here, from StoneCo, the most direct competitor is Square. What I see is that, for example, StoneCo is valued at 1.8 times sales, and Square is 2.5x times sales. Nubank 5.1 times sales, SoFi 8.9 times sales, and then MercadoLibre 5.6 times sales, and Shopify 8.7. And I can't use Amazon here because Amazon has Amazon Web Services, which is much of the valuation of Amazon. So U.S. counterparts are valued, maybe 60-70% more than Brazilian firms. For I would argue firms that have a similar potential. And remember, these are companies that grow very fast, 50-60% with 50-80% gross margins. So why are they undervalued? I really don't know. By the way, if you want to see deep dive, I've done 2 deep dive on these Brazilian stocks, one on MercadoLibre and one on Nubank, and I'll put these in the description. And I'm going to do a deep dive analysis on StoneCo very soon. So stay tuned and maybe to subscribe to the channel. That way you can get access to the analysis. So what I wanted to do in this video is kind of figure out why. Why are Brazilian stocks so cheap? Is there a Brazilian discount right now? And then why? Why is that Brazilian discount out there? And does that discount scare me? And no, that discount doesn't scare me because I own 2 out of these 3 companies, and I'm seriously considering Nubank as well as an investment. So no, but I just wanted to go over a few facts about Brazil because it's a country I've never been to, and I don't know much about Brazil. But I wanted to do like an objective review of the country and what the country looks like for us as investors. And so I use the CIA World Fact Book, which is kind of a neutral source. I would argue more neutral than a lot of sources. So, and I'm going to go risk and opportunities. So what is one of the main risks of investing in Brazil? So one of the big risks is corruption. There's been a lot of corruption scandals in Brazil involving private companies and government officials, including the impeachment and conviction of former President Dilma Rousseff in 2016. So there's been quite a bit of corruption going on in Brazil. In fact, MercadoLibre's main competitor, Americanas, is on the edge of verge of bankruptcy because of some sort of fraud, and we don't really know what's going on. But there's been a lot of that. So that's one risk: corruption, fraud. I would argue that warrants a little bit of a discount compared to, say, some other companies in different countries. But are there no opportunities? Well, I found that very interesting. Brazil is part of a trade bloc called Mercosur. And not living there, of course, not as familiar with it, but Mercosur rings a bell. And when you dig into Mercosur, you realize it's a trade agreement. It's kind of NAFTA or USMCA now for the US, but for South America, which means that These three companies in Brazil can expand in countries like Argentina, for example, which is a pretty large country, thanks to this Mercosur agreement. So I would argue this is a big plus for these companies that they are part of a Mercosur agreement. It helps with trade, and it helps these companies really compete in South America in general. So Brazil can serve as a base for expansion within the Mercosur market. So again, very interesting here, and definitely an opportunity for these three companies. All right, let me move on to another risk. I always thought, perhaps more wrongly, that Brazil was growing, and Brazil is not really growing much. I mean, if you look at GDP growth rates, I mean, it's pretty much in line with the US, maybe a little more volatile than the US. But the country has pretty much flat GDP growth and has had flat GDP growth for a while. So obviously, I don't like that too much. Hopefully that changes with our new president, but that's more of a risk, right? You like to see GDP growth, especially if you have inflation like they have. They have similar inflation to the US in Brazil, and they've had a whole similar story with their central banks raising interest rates, which can be another reason why these stocks also fell harder than a lot of US stocks. So flat GDP growth, or flat-ish, right? A little up, but not up much. So that's a downside. What's an opportunity? Fascinating. The three companies in this video, right? StoneCo, Nubank, and MercadoLibre, they're all internet companies, or at least app companies. You know, it's all about using an app and using connectivity through the internet to grow your business. And this is where it gets very interesting. Brazil doesn't have high 90% penetration like a lot of countries. The estimate is about 81%. So you still have 1/5 to go on internet penetration in Brazil. So I think that's very important for people who invest in these in this tech internet-oriented stocks. As there's built-in growth in there, as Brazil, like all countries, like most countries, lean towards 99% of internet usage. So a nice 1/5 left. And what's perhaps even more interesting is the lack of broadband connection. And there's only 17 people per 100 inhabitants who has broadband. And when you think about broadband, that's very important. If you shop online, if you don't have broadband, if you're in a remote location, if you don't have a bad connection, it may make things like buying online or banking online much harder. And so as these numbers grow, they will make these internet companies more attractive. So I think this is very interesting that there's a room for growth both in internet usage, mostly through cell phones, and in broadband access and access to high-speed internet. So even though the country itself is pretty flat, pretty stable in terms of growth, for the purpose of these companies, that's a very good thing. Okay, let me move on. The population is flat. It's growing a little bit, right? 0.7%, but it's essentially flat. That's perhaps a little bit of a downside factor. It's flat. What I love about Brazil, though, is look at this: 217 million people. Like that's a lot of customers. That's 2/3 of America right there. So that is a lot of customers. That is definitely the biggest country in Latin America, and that's a nice country to bet on with this size. You're getting into a meaningful size country right there. So I love that. And here's one final thing that I love about Brazil, which I think is more favorable than the US. It is the age structure. So we know the age structure is so important because, right, the years where you consume the most, that's 25 to 54. That's when you consume the most. So if you're MercadoLibre, you're going to sell much more stuff to this age segment. If you are StoneCo, you're going to have much more transactions in this age segment. That's the family formation, kids, all of that. And so that cohort is, I would argue, quite a bit bigger in Brazil than it is in the US. So that's a big plus. But what I find even more of a big plus is they have a more youthful population than the US. And these people are future consumers, and they're going to move into those age brackets, and they are future consumers. So I would argue that the age pyramid of Brazil is much more favorable to those companies because those people are going to consume. So the age structure, I would argue, for Brazil is very interesting and very, very future oriented. Overall, when I see this curve, overall, it's not represented in the curve, but when I see these numbers, I get the feeling that Brazil is a youthful country, and this is good for internet usage. This is good for these free internet companies. Lastly, I will finish by saying that Brazil's economy may get better. They have a new president. Their central bank has been tackling inflation. Their central bank has been raising rates, just like the U.S. But I think there's a lot of excitement for kind of an economic reset that has come with the fight of inflation, and now their central bank easing rate hikes and really moving forward on a new level, right? And kind of resetting GDP growth, if that makes any sense. I feel like GDP growth is getting reset in Brazil with new expectations, with slowing inflation, very much like we're seeing in the US right now with the Fed's fight against inflation. And the Fed is winning against inflation in the US, and the US economy is starting off on a cooler, more sane base. I think the same is going on in Brazil right now. And so that could create a lot of upside for these three companies, and the discount between those US and those Brazilian stocks may decrease. So that was it for this video. Given this valuation, I will shortly make a video on StoneCo. I really appreciate if you can subscribe to the channel, if you can like this video. Thank you very much. It really helps me out. And as always, none of this has been investment advice. This is not and will never be investment advice. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.